The dust clouds never seemed to settle on planet Zephyria 7. Every morning, Sergeant Jake Thompson would wake up to the same orange sky, the same distant sounds of machinery, and the same weight in his chest that came from seeing too much pain. In one place, Jake had been stationed at the refugee camp for 8 months now. What started as a 3-month peacekeeping mission had stretched on as the war dragged through its 3rd year. The camp housed nearly 50,000 displaced Zephyrians, and every day brought new faces carrying the same haunted expressions. The Zephyrians were unlike anything Jake had seen before coming to this distant world. Their skin had a soft blue tint that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, and their eyes held colors that didn't exist on Earth. Most striking of all was their hair, which seemed to catch and hold light like spun silver threads. On this particular morning, Jake was making his usual rounds through the camp's main thoroughfare when he noticed her. She sat outside one of the temporary shelters, carefully braiding a young child's hair while humming a melody that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Her own silver hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and when she looked up, Jake saw eyes the color of deep violets. What struck him most wasn't her beauty, though she was certainly beautiful. It was the way she moved, with a careful grace that spoke of someone trying very hard to hold herself together. There was something in her posture that reminded Jake of his sister after their father died, that particular way of sitting that said, the world had become too heavy, but you were still carrying it anyway. The child she was braiding hair for couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Jake had seen this little girl before, always alone, always quiet. The camp was full of orphans, children who had lost their families in the endless fighting that had torn their world apart. She does that every morning, said Private Rodriguez, Jake's patrol partner, as they walked past. Been doing it since she arrived 3 weeks ago. Takes care of about a dozen kids who don't have anyone else. Jake glanced back. The woman was now helping the child with what looked like a small toy made from scraps of fabric and wire. Movements were patient, gentle, as if she had all the time in the world despite being in a place where time felt like it was running out for everyone. That evening, Jake found himself taking a different route through the camp. He told himself it was just a check on the security of the outer perimeter, but he knew that wasn't entirely true. He was curious about the woman with the violet eyes, and the way she seemed to create small pockets of peace in a place filled with despair. He found her sitting outside the same shelter, but this time she was alone. She was looking up at the stars, which shone differently here than they did on Earth. Her hands were folded in her lap, and there was something about the way she sat that made Jake think of someone waiting for something that might never come. The stars look different here, Jake said, approaching slowly. He had learned that sudden movements could startle the refugees, many of whom had lived through experiences that made them jump at shadows. She looked up at him, and Jake noticed that her translator device, a small blue disc that most Zephyrians wore to communicate with humans, was blinking softly. When she spoke, her voice came through the device with a slight mechanical edge, but he could still hear the music in her natural tone underneath. Yes, she said. Oh, on my world, we had 3 moons. The light was softer, more silver than gold. I used to sit on my balcony and watch them rise over the mountains. Jake sat down on a nearby crate, keeping a respectful distance. Where was your home? The capital city? It was beautiful once. She paused, and Jake could see her hands tighten slightly. Before the war came, they sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Jake had learned that many of the refugees needed time to find their words, especially when talking about what they had lost. The war had taken so much from these people, their homes, their families, their entire way of life. My name is Alina, she said finally. Alina Starweaver. Though I suppose the family name doesn't mean much now. I'm Jake Thompson. Names always mean something, even when everything else changes. Alina smiled for the first time since he had been watching her, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. It was a small smile, sad around the edges, but real. You're kind, she said. Not all of the soldiers are. Some look at us like we're just another problem to solve. Jake thought about that. It was true that some of his fellow soldiers had grown hard over the months. It was easier to see the refugees as numbers, as logistical challenges, rather than people with stories and dreams and broken hearts. But Jake had never been good at that kind of distance. "What did you do before?" he asked. "Before the war." Elena's expression grew distant. "I was a researcher. I studied the connections between different species, how they could live together peacefully. I was particularly interested in human and Zephyrian relations." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Ironic, isn't it? I spent years studying peace, and now I'm living in the aftermath of war." "That's not ironic," Jake said. "That's exactly why your work mattered. Someone has to believe peace is possible, even when everything looks hopeless." Lena studied his face in the dim light. "You speak like someone who has seen difficult things." Jake nodded. 3 tours of duty before this one. I've seen enough to know that hope is usually the first thing people lose and the last thing they need to give up." Over the following weeks, Jake found himself looking forward to these evening conversations. Elena would tell him about her world, the floating gardens of her city, the music that played from crystal formations in the mountains, the way her people celebrated the changing of their seasons. In return, Jake shared stories of Earth, the smell of rain on summer pavement, the way snow looked falling on pine trees, the sound of the ocean at dawn. But Elena never talked about her family, and Jake never pushed. He had learned to recognize the spaces around grief, the topics that were too tender to touch. It was during their 4th week of conversations that Elena finally opened that door. She had been quieter than usual, and Jake noticed she kept touching a small pendant that hung around her neck. "Today would have been my husband's birthday," she said suddenly. "He would have been 29. Jake felt his stomach drop. He had wondered about her history, but hearing it confirmed was different. "I'm sorry." "He was a peace negotiator," Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He believed that words could stop wars. Was trying to arrange a ceasefire when they killed him." "Elena, his family blames me," she said, and now Jake could hear the pain she had been carrying. "They say I should have died with him. That it's shameful for a widow to continue living when her husband cannot." Jake felt an anger rise in his chest, hot and protective. "That's not right. In our culture, it is complicated. A widow is expected to grieve deeply, to honor her husband's memory by carrying his loss forever. But double quotes, she touched the pendant again. I find myself wanting to live. I want to see tomorrow and the day after that. Does that make me selfish?" "It makes you human," Jake said. "You know what I mean?" Elena looked at him with those violet eyes, and Jake saw something in them that made his heart race. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. A recognition. A possibility. "The camp is being closed," she said. "In 2 weeks we'll be moved to Sector 12. Jake's blood went cold. Didn't knew about Sector 12. It was controlled by the same faction that had been responsible for most of the atrocities in this war. Sending refugees there wasn't relocation, it was a death sentence. "There has to be another option," he said. Elena shook her head. "Not for someone like me. I have no family to claim me, no resources to buy passage elsewhere. I am just another. A displaced person with nowhere to go." That night Jake couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Elena's words, about the resignation in her voice. He had seen enough injustice in his life to know that sometimes the system failed people who deserved better, but he had never been in a position to do anything about it. The next morning brought chaos. Insurgents had somehow breached the camp's outer defenses and were making their way toward the civilian areas. Jake and his unit rushed to intercept them, but in the confusion, several attackers broke through. Jake found himself running toward the residential section where Elena lived. He could hear the sounds of fighting ahead, the sharp crack of energy weapons, and the screams of people caught in the crossfire. He rounded a corner and saw Elena standing in front of a group of children, her arms spread wide as if she could shield them with her body alone. One of the insurgents was advancing on them, his weapon raised. Jake didn't think. He threw himself between Elena and the attacker, taking the energy blast meant for her. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like being struck by lightning and burned by fire at the same time. The last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was Elena's voice, speaking in her native language, words his translator couldn't quite catch but somehow understood anyway. She was telling him he was brave, that he mattered, that someone saw him as more than just a soldier following orders. When Jake woke up in the medical tent 2 days later, the first thing he saw was Elena's face. She was sitting beside his bed, her hands busy with. Jake spent the next 3 days in the medical tent, and Elena visited him every morning and evening. She would bring him water that tasted slightly sweet, something from her world that helped humans heal faster, she explained. Sometimes she would sit quietly while he rested, and other times they would talk about small things that somehow felt important. During one of these visits, Lena told him about her late husband. His name was Cale, and he had been everything Jake wasn't: diplomatic. Where Jake was direct, gentle where Jake was strong, a dreamer where Jake was practical. But as Elena spoke about him, Jake didn't feel jealous. Instead, he felt sad for this man he had never met. This person who had loved Elena and tried to bring peace to a world that wasn't ready for it. He used to say that every person carries a song inside them, Elena said, her fingers tracing patterns on the small pendant she always wore. He said that when two people truly understand each other, their songs harmony together, called it soul music. Jake didn't understand what she meant, but something about the way she said it made his chest feel warm. Did you and he, did your songs match? Elena smiled, but it was a sad smile. In some ways, yes. He was my best friend, my partner in everything. But there were parts of my song he never heard, parts I never shared with him. Why not? Because I was afraid they might not fit together. Because sometimes loving someone means keeping the parts of yourself that might hurt them locked away. Jake thought about that. He had never been in love. Not really. He had dated people, had relationships that lasted months or sometimes a year. But he had never felt like someone truly knew him. He had always assumed that was just how life worked, that everyone kept parts of themselves hidden. Maybe that's not love, he said finally. Maybe love is when you can share all the parts of yourself, even the ones that don't fit perfectly. Elena looked at him with those violet eyes, and Jake felt something pass between them. It was like she was seeing something in him that he didn't even know was there. You're different than I expected, she said. Different how? When I first saw you, I thought you were just another soldier, someone doing his job following orders. But you think about things. You feel things deeply. Jake felt his cheeks warm. He had never been good at accepting compliments, especially from someone like Elena, who seemed to see right through him. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Harrison, Jake's superior officer. The older man looked tired, the kind of tired that came from making decisions no one should have to make. Thompson, he said, nodding to Jake. Good to see you're recovering, ma'am, he added, acknowledging Elena with the formal politeness he showed all the refugees. Sir, Jake replied, trying to sit up straighter despite the pain in his chest. I have some news about the camp closure. The timeline has been moved up. We're beginning relocations in 1 week instead of 2. Jake felt his stomach drop. Elena went very still beside him, her hands clenching in her lap. Sir, about the Sector 12 relocations, I know what you're going to say, Thompson. I know it's not ideal, but we have our orders. The peace talks have stalled, and the provisional government, once all refugees moved to designated areas. After the commander left, Elena stood up abruptly. I should go. The children will be wondering where I am. But Jake could see that she was shaking. Elena, wait, no, it's better this way. Quick, like removing a bandage. I've been foolish, allowing myself to hope that something might change. Elena, please sit down. She sat, but she wouldn't look at him. I've been thinking about what you said, about sharing all parts of yourself. I haven't been honest with you about something. Jake waited. I know about Earth. I know more than I've told you. For the past 5 years, I've been studying human culture, human society, human law. It wasn't just academic research. I was part of a program that was supposed to facilitate immigration between our worlds. What kind of program? Cultural exchange? Marriage programs? Ways for our people to build connections. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. I know about your immigration laws. I know about the intergalactic accords that govern marriage between species. Jake felt his heart start to race. Elena, I know that a human citizen can sponsor a Zephyrian spouse for permanent residence on Earth. I know that the marriage has to be real, that there are interviews and investigations and tests to prove it's genuine. She finally looked at him, and Jake saw desperation in her eyes that made his chest ache. I know it's wrong to ask. I know it's selfish and impossible and probably illegal. But Jake, I can't go to Sector 12. I can't die there when I have finally found reasons to want to live. Jake stared at her. Are you asking me to marry me? The words came out in a rush, like she had to say them quickly before she lost her courage. Not for love, not for romance. It's just for a chance. A chance to see your world, to use my knowledge, to help other refugees, to build something meaningful with whatever time I have left. Jake's mind was spinning. Marriage. To Alina. To this woman who had become so important to him that he couldn't imagine the camp without her. Couldn't imagine his daily rounds without looking forward to their evening conversations. Lena, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that I'm just using you, that I don't really care about you, and maybe that's true. Maybe I'm just desperate enough to ask a stranger to turn his whole life upside down for me? That's not what I'm thinking. Then what are you thinking? Jake was quiet for a long moment. What was he thinking? He was thinking that the idea of Alina disappearing into Sector 12 made him feel sick. He was thinking that he had never met anyone who made him want to be a better person, just by being around them. He was thinking that maybe this was crazy, but maybe crazy was exactly what the situation called for. I'm thinking, he said slowly, that I've never been married before. I've never even lived with someone. I don't know how to be a husband, especially to someone from a different world. Elena's face fell. I understand. It was too much to ask. Not finished. Jake reached out and took her hand, surprised by how natural it felt. I'm also thinking that I've spent 8 months watching people lose everything. I'm tired of being someone who just watches. I'm thinking that maybe doing something crazy for someone I care about is the first smart thing I've done in years. Lena's eyes widened. You care about me, Elena? I think I've been falling in love with you since the first night we talked about. The stars. The words hung in the air between them. Jake couldn't believe he had said them out loud. Couldn't believe he had finally admitted to himself what he had been feeling. You don't have to say that, Elena whispered. You don't have to pretend this is something it's not. I'm not pretending. I'm scared out of my mind, but I'm not pretending. Elena looked at their joined hands. I can't promise I'll ever love you the way I loved Kale. I can't promise I'll be what you need or that I'll fit into your world. I can't promise any of those things either, but I can promise that I'll try. I can promise that I'll do everything I can to make sure you're safe, that you have a chance at the life you want. Alina was crying now, tears that caught the light like liquid diamonds. This is insane. Yeah, it is. We barely know each other. We know each other better than most people who get married. What if it doesn't work? What if they don't believe us? Jake squeezed her hand. Then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have given you a chance. Lena pulled her hand free and stood up, pacing the small space beside his bed. There's something else. Something I haven't told you. Jake waited.
The immigration process
isn't just paperwork. They interview you separately. Together, they ask personal questions. They want to know everything about your relationship, your habits, your dreams, your fears. They're looking for any sign that the marriage isn't real. Then we'll have to make it real. How do you make a marriage real when it starts with desperation instead of love? Jake thought about that. Maybe we start with friendship. Maybe we start with respect and caring and see where that leads us. Alina stopped pacing and looked at him. You would really do this? You would change your entire life for someone you've known for 3 weeks, Alina. 3 weeks ago, I was just going through the motions, getting up, doing my job, going to sleep, and starting over. You made me remember what it feels like to look forward to something. You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone else's happiness. And if I can never love you back, Jake smiled, then I'll have spent my life married to someone I admire, someone who makes me want to be better than I am. There are worse fates. Lena sat back down, and this time she took his hand. If we do this, it has to be real. It's not just on paper, but in our hearts. I won't lie to immigration officials, and I won't live a lie. What does that mean? It means we have to try, really try, to build something together to learn each other's songs, to see if we can create harmony. Jake felt something shift in his chest, something that felt like hope mixed with terror. Are you saying yes? I'm saying yes to the chance. Yes to trying. Yes to seeing if two people from different worlds can build something beautiful together. Jake squeezed her hand. Then let's go talk to the commander. Let's see if we can make this work. The wedding ceremony took place in the camp's administrative office 3 days later. Jake wore his dress uniform, the one he had packed but never expected to use on a distant planet. Alina wore a simple white dress that one of the other refugees had given her. She had woven small silver flowers into her hair, a Zephyrian tradition that was supposed to bring good fortune to new beginnings. Commander Harrison performed the ceremony, reading from a standard military handbook while 2 other soldiers served as witnesses. It took less than 10 minutes, but Jake felt like his entire world had shifted by the time they signed the papers. "Congratulations, Mrs. Thompson," the commander said to Alina, and Jake saw her flinch slightly at the unfamiliar name. Everything was happening so fast, too fast for either of them to really process what they had just done. But their celebration was cut short by news that made Jake's blood run cold. A message had come through from Earth's Immigration Council. Due to recent increases in fraudulent wartime marriages, all new spouse visas would be subject to intensive review. Jake and Alina would have 6 months to prove their relationship was genuine, or Alina would be deported back to Zephyria 7. 6 months, Alina whispered as they walked back to Jake's temporary quarters. That's not very long to convince people we're really in love. Jake stopped walking. Alina, look at me. She turned, and he could see the fear in her violet eyes. We're going to figure this out. We're going to learn everything we need to know about each other. We're going to make this work. Alina nodded, but Jake could see she was trying not to cry. I'm scared, Jake. What if I can't be what you need me to be? What if I don't fit into your world? Before Jake could answer, they heard shouting from the direction of the transport landing pad. The ship that would take them to Earth had arrived early. They would be leaving in 2 hours instead of tomorrow morning. Those 2 hours passed in a blur of packing, paperwork, and goodbyes. Alina hugged each of the orphan children she had been caring for, promising them she would find a way to help them from Earth. Jake watched her heart break a little more with each goodbye, and he wondered if he was doing the right thing by taking her away from people who needed her. The transport ship Harmony's Edge was bigger than Jake had expected, designed to carry both military personnel and civilian passengers. Their cabin was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds and a tiny porthole that showed the stars. I can sleep on the floor, Jake offered as they stood in the doorway, both of them suddenly aware that they were married strangers, about to share a very small space. Don't be silly, Alina said, though her cheeks darkened with embarrassment. We're both adults. We can share a room without it being awkward. But it was awkward, at least at first. Jake had never lived with a woman before, and Alina had never lived with anyone except her late husband. They bumped into each other trying to use the tiny washing station. They spoke at the same time, then stopped at the same time, then laughed nervously at the same time. On the second day, Jake woke up to find Alina sitting by the porthole, staring out at the stars. She was wearing a sleep gown that seemed to be made of the same material as moonbeams, and her silver hair was loose around her shoulders. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. I keep thinking about the children, she said, about whether they'll be safe, about whether I'm a terrible person for leaving them. Jake sat down on the floor beside her chair. You're not terrible. You're trying to survive so you can help them later. How do you know that's what I'm doing? How do you know I'm not just running away? Jake thought about that. Because I've watched you for weeks. I've seen how you take care of people. It's not something you do because you have to. It's something you do because of who you are. Alina looked down at him. Do you see me more clearly than I see myself sometimes? Maybe that's what partners do for each other. Over the next few days, they began to settle into a routine. Alina would tell Jake about Zephyrian customs and culture, things he would need to know to convince immigration officials that their relationship was real. Jake would share stories about Earth, about his family, about the places he wanted to show her. Tell me about your childhood, Alina said one evening, as they shared dinner from the ship's food dispensers. Jake smiled. I grew up in a small town in Colorado. My mom was a teacher. My dad worked at the local factory. I have 2 sisters, one older, one younger. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Do they know about me? Jake's smile faded. I sent them a message before we left. I told them I was married, that I was bringing my wife home. I didn't tell them about the circumstances. Are you ashamed of me? No, Jake said quickly. Alina, no. I'm not ashamed of you. I don't know how to explain this to people who've never been in a war zone. I don't know how to make them understand that sometimes doing the right thing looks crazy from the outside. Alina reached across the small table and took his hand. Then we'll figure it out together. As the days passed, Jake began to notice things about Alina that he had missed in the camp. The way she hummed while she worked, melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. The way she moved her hands when she talked like she was painting pictures in the air. The way she always checked on him before she went to sleep, making sure he was comfortable and had everything he needed. Alina noticed things about Jake too. How he always let her choose what they would eat, what they would talk about, what they would do with their time. How he never crowded her, never pushed for more intimacy than she was ready for. How he listened to her stories about her world with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really hearing her. You're a good man, Jake Thompson, she said one night as they were getting ready for bed. What makes you say that? You could have asked for more. You could have said that since we're married, I owe you something. But you've never made me feel like I'm in debt to you. Jake turned to look at her. Alina, you don't owe me anything. We're partners in this, remember? Is that what we are? Partners? Jake thought about that. I think we're becoming something. I'm not sure what to call it yet, but it's more than just a business arrangement. Alina smiled. I think so too. But their peace was shattered during the second week of their journey. Alina had been quieter than usual, spending more time by the porthole, eating less. Jake had noticed but hadn't wanted to push her to talk about it. Then, during a routine system check, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they had encountered a solar storm and that all passengers should remain in their cabins. The ship shuddered and shook as it was buffeted by energy waves. Jake could hear the crew running through the corridors, shouting orders to each other. But what scared him most was Alina. She was curled up on her bed, her skin pale, and her breathing shallow. When Jake touched her forehead, it was cold, too cold. Alina, what's wrong? I can't feel my world anymore, she whispered. The connection is broken. Jake didn't understand what she meant, but he could see that she was in real distress. He called for the ship's medic, who arrived within minutes. It's energy sickness, the medic explained after examining Alina. Some Zephyrians are sensitive to their home planet's magnetic field. When they get too far away, their bodies begin to shut down. Is there anything you can do? The medic shook his head. Not with our equipment. She needs to be near something that can replicate her world's energy signature. Jake felt panic rising in his chest. Are you saying she's going to die? Saying she's very sick, and I don't know how to help her. Jake spent the next 6 hours sitting beside Alina's bed, holding her hand and talking to her, even when she seemed unconscious. He told her about Earth, about the mountains where he grew up, about the life they would build together, he told her. About his feelings, about how she had changed him, about how empty his future looked without her in it. Don't leave me, he whispered. Please don't leave me. Just found you. Alina's eyes fluttered open. Jake, I'm here. I'm right here. I can hear your song, she said, her voice barely audible. It's beautiful. It's like strength mixed with gentleness, like a mountain stream. Jake felt tears in his eyes. Alina, stay with me. Fight this. I'm trying, but I'm so tired. Then rest. But don't go. Promise me you won't go. Alina squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. I promise. But Jake, if something happens to me, I need you to know something. What? This wasn't just about surviving. It's these past weeks with you. I've been happier than I thought I could be again. You've given me something I didn't think was possible. What's that? A reason to hope. Jake leaned down and kissed her forehead. Then hope. Hope for both of us. As the solar storm raged outside their cabin, Jake held Alina close and whispered every prayer he had ever learned, adding a few new ones that came from somewhere deeper than words. He had found something worth fighting for, something worth believing in, and he wasn't going to let the universe take it away from him, not without a fight. Alina recovered slowly during the final week of their journey, but she was still weak when their ship finally docked at Earth's primary spaceport. Jake had to help her walk down the boarding ramp, and he could feel her trembling as they made their way through the busy terminal filled with humans rushing in every direction. "It's so loud," Elena whispered, pressing closer to Jake as they waited in line for customs, "and everything smells different." Jake looked around, trying to see the spaceport through her eyes. The harsh fluorescent lights, the constant announcements. Over the intercom, the crowds of people pushing past each other without making eye contact. He had never noticed how cold and impersonal it all felt. "We'll be home soon," he said. Though he wasn't sure his small apartment in New Denver would feel like home to someone who had grown up among floating gardens and crystal music. The customs officer barely glanced at their papers before stamping them and waving them through. But as they collected their luggage, Jake noticed a man in a dark suit watching them from across the terminal. When their eyes met, the man looked away. But Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The flight to New Denver was Elena's first time in an Earth aircraft, and she spent most of the 2-hour journey staring out the window at the landscape passing below. Jake watched her face as she took in the snow-capped mountains, the vast forests, the cities that spread out like scattered jewels. "It's beautiful," she said, "but so different from home. Everything is so solid, permanent." Jake's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a modest building near the city center. As he unlocked the door, he suddenly felt embarrassed by how small and plain it was. The furniture was basic military issue. The walls were bare, and the kitchen was barely big enough for one person, let alone two. "This is it," he said, setting down their bags. "I know it's not much, but it's perfect," Elena interrupted, walking to the window that looked out over the city. "It's yours. That makes it perfect." But Jake could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way she held herself carefully, as if she might break. The journey had taken more out of her than she was willing to admit. "You should rest," he said. "Take the bedroom. I'll sleep on the couch." Elena turned to face him. "Jake, we're married. Can't sleep in separate rooms when the immigration officers come to visit." She was right, of course. Jake had read about the home visits, the unexpected inspections where officers would check to see if couples were really living as husband and wife. But the thought of sharing a bed with Elena when she was still so fragile, still grieving her first husband, made him feel like he was taking advantage of her vulnerability. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Right now, you need to sleep." The next few days were harder than either of them had expected. Elena couldn't eat most Earth foods. They were too heavy, too processed for her system. She couldn't sleep properly because Earth's day-night cycle was different from her home planet's. The gravity made her feel constantly tired, and the air made her throat scratchy. Jake found himself walking on eggshells, afraid to leave her alone but not sure how to help. He would come home from his debriefing sessions at the military base to find Elena sitting by the window, staring out at the city with an expression of such loneliness that it made his chest ache. "I'm sorry," she said one evening when he found her crying in the kitchen. "I'm trying to adjust, but everything feels wrong. The food, the air, the sounds. Even the light is different." Jake sat down beside her at the small table. "You don't have to apologize for being homesick, but I do. You've given up everything for me, and I can't even manage to be grateful without complaining. Elena, you left your entire world behind. You're allowed to miss it." Elena wiped her eyes. "Tell me about your family. Maybe if I understand your world better, I'll feel less lost in it." So Jake told her about his parents, how his father had worked 2 jobs to put his children through school, how his mother had taught him to cook and to listen more than he spoke. He told her about his sisters, how they had teased him mercilessly, but always protected him when it mattered. "They want to meet you," he said. "My mom has already started planning a dinner party." Elena smiled for the first time in days. "Did you tell them about me?" "I told them you were beautiful and kind and that you made me want to be a better man." "And they believed you?" Jake laughed. "My mom said she's never heard me talk about anyone the way I talked about you. She said it was about time I found someone who could keep up with me." As the days passed, Elena began to find her footing. discovered that Earth's music, while different from her world's crystal harmonies, had its own beauty. She learned to cook simple meals that her stomach could handle. She found a small park near their apartment where she could sit among the trees and feel less homesick. Jake, meanwhile, was learning things about Alina that amazed him. She was incredibly intelligent, able to understand complex technical manuals just by reading them once. She had a gift for languages, picking up Earth slang and expressions with startling speed. And she had a way of seeing beauty in things that Jake had stopped noticing years ago. "Look," she said one morning, pointing to the frost patterns on their window. "It's like art that the sky painted just for us." Jake looked, and for the first time in his adult life, he really saw the intricate beauty of frost crystals. "You're right. It is beautiful." But their peaceful adjustment period was shattered. When the immigration letter arrived, Agent Patricia Wells from the Immigration Council would be conducting their first interview in 3 days. What kind of questions will they ask? Alina wanted to know. Jake had researched this extensively. Everything. How we met, when we knew. We were in love. What we like about each other. What we argue about. What side of the bed we sleep on. What we eat for breakfast. Alina went pale. "Jake, we don't argue. We barely know each other's habits. We don't even really sleep in the same bed." She was right. They had been so careful with each other, so polite, that they were more like respectful roommates than husband and wife. "Then we need to change that," Jake said. "We need to start living like a real married couple." That night, Alina moved her things into Jake's bedroom. They lay in the darkness, both of them staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of the other. Person just inches away. "Jake." Elena's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah. What if they ask me what I love about you?" Jake's heart started racing. "What would you say?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I would say that you're the first person who ever made me feel safe without making me feel weak. I would say that you see me as a whole person, not just someone who needs saving. I would say that you make me laugh, even when I think I've forgotten how." Jake felt something shift in his chest. "Alina, ... what would you say about me?" Jake thought about that. "I would say that you're the strongest person I've ever met. I would say that you find beauty in everything, even in places where I can't see it. I would say that you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you." Alina turned onto her side to face him. "Jake, I think I'm starting to understand what my husband meant about soul songs." "What do you mean?" "I think yours is getting mixed up with mine. I think maybe that's what's been happening all along, and I was too scared to notice." Jake turned. To face her, and even in the darkness, he could see the silver gleam of her hair, the faint glow of her skin. "I'm saying that maybe we don't have to pretend anymore. Maybe what we have is real, even if it started in a strange way." Jake reached out and touched her cheek. "Alina, are you sure?" "I don't want you to feel like you have to, I'm sure," she said, and leaned forward to kiss him. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But when Jake kissed her back, Alina melted against him, and suddenly they were holding each other like they had been waiting their whole lives for this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "So," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion, "what do we tell the immigration officer?" Lena smiled, and it was the first truly happy smile Jake had seen from her since they arrived on Earth. "We tell them the truth. We tell them that sometimes love sneaks up on you when you're not looking for it. We tell them that sometimes the best things in life start with trying to save each other." Jake pulled her closer, and Alina settled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin. For the first time since their journey began, Jake felt like they might actually make it. They might actually build something beautiful together, something that would last. Outside their window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and Jake realized that home wasn't a place. It was the person lying in his arms, the woman who had changed his entire world just by being in it. The immigration interview was scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. Jake had taken the day off work, and Alina had spent the previous evening going through their photo albums, practicing answers to questions they might be asked, and trying to calm her nerves. Agent Patricia Wells arrived exactly on time, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression that gave nothing away. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that made Jake feel like he was back in basic training. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, she said, settling into their small living room. I'm here to conduct your marriage verification interview. This is a standard procedure for all spousal immigration cases. Jake and Elena sat together on the couch there, hands linked. Jake could feel Elena's pulse racing through her fingers. Let's start with some basic questions, Agent Wells said, opening her folder. How did you two meet? Jake and Elena exchanged a glance. They had practiced this answer, but sitting here under the agent's scrutiny made everything feel different. We met at the refugee camp on Zephyr 7, Jake said. I was stationed there as part of the peacekeeping force. And what was your first impression of your husband, Mrs. Thompson? Elena's cheeks darkened slightly. I thought he was different from the other soldiers. Looked at me like I was a person, not just another refugee to be processed. Interesting. And Mr. Thompson? What attracted you to your wife? Jake felt his throat tighten. Her strength. She had lost everything, but she was still taking care of orphan children, still finding ways to help others. She made me want to be a better man. Agent Wells made notes as they spoke. When did you decide to get married? This was the question they had been dreading. Jake took a deep breath. When Elena told me she was going to be relocated to Sector 12, I knew what that meant for her safety. And I couldn't let that happen to someone I cared about. So this was a rescue marriage? Elena straightened up. It started that way, she said quietly. But it became something more. Explain that to me. Elena looked at Jake, and he saw something in her eyes that gave him courage. When Jake asked me to marry him, I thought it was just kindness. But during our journey to Earth, I began to understand that what we had was real. Didn't just save my life, he gave me a reason to want to live it. Agent Wells spent the next hour asking detailed questions about their daily routines, their habits, their plans for the future. Some questions were easy: what time Jake left for work, what Elena liked to eat for breakfast, who controlled the television remote. Others were more personal. Did they want children? What did they argue about? How did they handle money? We don't really argue, Elena admitted. We talk through things. Jake listens to my concerns, and I listen to his. We try to understand each other instead of trying to win. That's unusual for most couples, Agent Wells observed. Maybe that's because we started as friends, Jake said. We got to know each other before we fell in love. After the agent left, Jake and Elena sat in their living room, emotionally exhausted. Do you think we convinced her? Elena asked. I don't know, Jake admitted. She was hard to read. 2 weeks later, they received a letter that made Elena's blood run cold. Agent Wells had found inconsistencies in their story and was recommending further investigation. It would need to appear before an immigration board for a final hearing. What inconsistencies? Elena asked, reading the letter for the third time. Jake studied the document. It says here that neighbors reported we don't act like a typical married couple, that we're too polite to each other, too careful. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. So we're being punished for being respectful. Elena, we're going to fight this. We're going to prove that what we have is real. But Elena was already standing up, pacing the small room. Maybe they're right. Maybe we are just pretending. Maybe I convinced myself I loved you because I was grateful, because I needed to believe it. Jake felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Elena, that's not true. How do you know? She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. How do you know the difference between love and gratitude? How do you know I'm not just a broken person clinging to the first person who showed me kindness? Jake stood up and walked to her, taking her shoulders gently. Because I know you. I know that you're not the kind of person who would lie to yourself or to me. I know that when you laugh at my terrible jokes, it's real. I know that when you worry about me working late, it's real. I know that when you hold me at night, it's real. But what if the board doesn't believe us? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Elena, I need you to know something. Even if they send you away, even if we only had these few months, together, I'm grateful for every day. You changed my life. Elena looked up at him, and Jake saw the fear in her violet eyes. I'm scared, Jake. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of going back to a world where I don't belong anymore. You belong here, Jake said firmly. We're going to make them see that. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. Jake requested character witnesses from his military unit. Alina gathered testimonials from the refugee families she had been helping at the local community center. The night before the hearing, Alina couldn't sleep. She stood by their bedroom window looking out at the city lights, and Jake found her there at 2 in the morning. "Having second thoughts?" he asked softly. "Having all the thoughts," Alina replied. "Thinking about my first husband, about the life I had before, about the life I want now." Jake joined her at the window. "What conclusion are you coming to?" Alina turned to face him. "I'm thinking that love isn't something you fall into once and never again. I'm thinking that my first husband would want me to be happy. I'm thinking that maybe the best way to honor his memory is to embrace the love I found with you." Jake felt his heart swell. Alina, ... double quotes. "I love you, Jake Thompson. Not because you saved me, not because I'm grateful, but because you're kind. And strong and funny, and you make me feel like I'm home, even when I'm millions of miles away from where I was born." Jake pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Alina melted against him the way she had that first night when they stopped pretending. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible." The hearing the next day was intimidating. He sat before a panel of 3 officials in a formal conference room, with Agent Wells presenting her case for why their marriage should be considered fraudulent. "The evidence suggests," Agent Wells said, "that this marriage was entered into solely for immigration purposes. The couple shows none of the typical signs of a romantic relationship established before marriage." Then it was their turn to speak. Jake stood up, his hands shaking slightly. "6 months ago, I was a soldier doing his job. I got up every day, followed orders, and went to bed without thinking much about the future. Then I met Alina, and everything changed." He looked at his wife, who was sitting straight and proud despite her fear. Alina didn't just need someone to save her. She needed someone to see her. To see that she was more than her circumstances, more than her grief, more than her fear. And in seeing her, really seeing her, I learned what it meant to love someone. Completely. Alina stood up beside him. "I was a widow who thought her heart had died with her husband. I thought I would never feel joy again, never feel hope again. But Jake showed me that love isn't finite. That caring for him doesn't diminish what I felt for my first husband. That it's possible to honor the past while embracing the future." The lead official, an elderly man with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, what would you say to someone who suggested you only married for a visa?" Alina looked directly at him. "I would say that maybe it started that way. But I would also say that the best love stories aren't always the ones that begin with poetry and flowers. Sometimes they begin with 2 people who choose to save each other, and then choose to save each other again every day after that." Panel deliberated for what felt like hours. When they finally returned, Jake felt Alina's hand squeeze his so tightly he thought she might break his fingers. "After reviewing all the evidence," the lead official said, "we find that while this marriage may have begun under unusual circumstances, it has clearly evolved into a genuine partnership. Mrs. Thompson, your request for permanent residency is approved." Alina burst into tears, and Jake pulled her into his arms as relief washed over both of them. 6 months later, they had a proper wedding ceremony in the mountains where Jake had grown up. Alina wore a dress that combined Earth and Zephyrian traditions, and Jake's whole family was there to welcome her home. During the ceremony, Alina spoke about her first husband, thanking him for teaching her about love and asking for his blessing on her new beginning. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. As they danced under the stars that night, Alina looked up at Jake and smiled. "I can hear our songs now," she said. "They're different from what I had before, but they're beautiful together." Jake spun her around, and her laughter echoed off the mountains. "What do they sound like?" "Like coming home," Alina said. "Like finding exactly where you belong."